Hi, personal finance gang. Welcome to another edition of our online class. Just a quick note. I saw in the paper today a little article about a judge mad about attorneys who are working from home and doing web broadcasts like this, or dialing in or whatever, doing Zoom meetings and however they're doing their legal stuff. But he was upset that some lawyer appeared on screen with no shirt, I guess at his swimming pool, and a lady, he said, was actually looked to be under her covers in bed. I'm actually up wearing a shirt and shaving once a week or so. But I hope you guys are doing well. Let's get to our topic here. And remember, we're talking about mutual funds, and these are companies that are going to take investor money, pool those funds, and then buy a diversified portfolio of securities. And you're part owner of that entire portfolio. The fund has to pass through any earnings they get from the securities they hold and also any capital gains. So you'll get both dividends and capital gains distributions. But what we're going to talk about for just a bit are bond funds. We've talked previously about bonds, and something you should definitely know. If you buy a bond, you are lending money. But bond funds are going to be categorized based on the types of bonds they hold for the most part. So we have some broad categories of funds. These are based on the issuer of the bonds. So we have bonds issued by the U.S. government. Those are treasury bonds. We have bonds issued by corporations, corporate bonds. Bonds issued by state and local governments. Those are municipal bonds. We have mortgage-backed bonds. I've got that grayed out. We're not going to discuss those. Those are a topic for more detail later on for a different class. And then, of course, we have bonds that can be issued by foreign corporations, foreign governments, etc. So this is one way to categorize bonds, is by the issuer. And these also, on average, affect the risk of the bonds as well. We know that the U.S. government bonds are considered among the safest in the world. Now, we can categorize other bonds, such as corporate bonds and such, by quality. Are they investment grade? Are these safe bonds? Remember, we saw the letter grades of bonds. These are based on the default risk of the bonds. So safer bonds are considered investment grade. Riskier bonds, also known as junk bonds, are more speculative. So the riskier the bond, the higher the required return. So these speculative bonds should pay a higher return, if all goes well, than the investment grade bonds, which are safer. Another way to classify bonds is by how long until they mature. Short-term bonds considered to have 1 to 5 years left till maturity. Intermediate term bonds, 5 to 10 years left. And long-term bonds over 10 years. So we could have had a 30-year bond that now only has 7 years left until it matures. So it was originally 30 years and 23 years have passed. That would now be in the intermediate category. Then when it got even closer to maturity, it would drop down in the short-term category. So let me show you real quick, where could you find this type stuff. So I'm showed before my favorite fund family. It's a non-profit, has low expense ratios, is Vanguard. And here I filtered for bond funds. And so we've got the first category here are treasury bonds. And so someone asked about inflation protected securities. They've actually done quite well this year, 8% return for the year. Intermediate term bonds, up 10%. So this is treasury bonds by term. Long-term bonds in there as well. These have a fee to get into them, so I don't know what's up with that. And then anyway, so we get all sorts of different categories here for treasury bonds even, mostly based on term to maturity there. And then we have investment grade bonds, intermediate term, long term, short term. Long term investment grade. Sure to turn off your phone so they don't beep at you. Long term investment grade bonds up 20%. Oh, that's for 2019. Well, that's really good. And then most of that's from dropping interest rates. And anyway, I don't have 2020 so far shown up here. I could change that. Let's see. It's just giving me, as of 4/13, these are, so let me go back here. Investment intermediate term as of year to date, that minus 1.18%, intermediate term up 2.3, long term up 1.75. A little bit different. Long-term investment grade was up 6.7%. So they have some of these. Oh, there's ultra short-term up about nothing. But anyway, so different ways, or you can pick your fund based on those different categories. Below investment grade, Vanguard only has one of these. It's down 6% for the year. Some municipal type issues there. And then some international bonds options there. Not a lot of choices at Vanguard for those. But again, you can find your bond funds based on these different categories. We had time. I'm trying to back up here. We had quality and we had issuer. Those are the main ways to find bonds. And you can find a bond style box for bonds, and they'll tell you, are these Treasury agency, investment grade, below investment grade corporates, and based on maturity there as well. So that's a style box for bonds. We saw a style box for stock last time. Now, if you need money right away, you might need money for emergency. What mutual fund option would you pick for this? Well, you definitely wouldn't pick a stock fund because we've seen that those can plop and plop quite quickly. What you would probably want is a money market fund. I actually for a while had some of my emergency money in a short-term bond fund because money market funds were paying next to nothing for a while. The short-term bond fund gave me a little yield. But those actually got hit and we're down, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9% at one point this year from the coronavirus, and those usually don't move much. But the coronavirus has changed the rules up a bit. But a money market fund is generally a place for your emergency funds. Let's see if I could, just trying to see if I can pull up some Vanguard money market funds. Yeah, it's not. Oh, sorry. Yeah, here we go, finally. No. All right, there we go, finally, sorry. So we have some money market funds. Vanguard has a couple categories. The main one there that I would probably do is this Prime Fund. And year to date, it's earned a whopping 0.42%, so not much going on year to date. Last year it earned 2%. Well, that's actually not too bad for, we're not quite 4 months of the way through the year. Might get you up to that 2% again. But not big payouts from these, but safety is what you're going for with these money markets. So remember, that's a potential place for your rainy day funds. So yeah, money market, what they do, these money market funds, all the securities that it's holding. Remember, when you buy a mutual fund, you're buying part of a diversified portfolio of securities. And with the money market fund, those are all securities that have maturities of a year or less, and those are high investment grade securities, highly rated investment grade securities, very liquid. So the goal of the money market fund is to keep that dollar value, not to go lose money and pay interest on top of that. We have had in the past a money market fund or two break the buck, in other words, lose money. But I think right now there may even be some federal guarantees to back these up so people didn't get afraid to keep their money in a money market fund. So again, it's about as safe as you can get without FDIC insurance and maybe get a little bit higher return. So again, we talked about all these different categories for both stocks and bonds. So what are you going to do with all these categories? Well, pick the funds that match your risk tolerance and your investment goals. So are you saving for retirement? Are you willing to take on risk? You pick stock, and primarily stock funds that match your goals. So what is it you're trying to achieve? What's your time horizon? If it's a short time horizon, you definitely don't want your money in stock, but you pick time horizon and funds that match your risk goals. And I said this, I think the last time, but if you're freaking out going, geez, I don't want to deal with all this, but I want to be invested in the market, or I want to be invested, but I don't want all these hassles. If you're saving for retirement, here you go. Something like several different, many different mutual funds will offer target retirement date funds. They might not call it exactly that, but some basic name like that. So you pick a fund like this Vanguard Target Retirement 2065. You don't have to worry about anything. They do the asset allocation for you. And, it's relatively high risk level. They've got risk ranked from 1 to 5, and this is a 4. But what they're going to do is change the allocation in this fund over time as you get closer and closer to retirement. And we looked at this allocation last time, and we'll touch back on this one again in a few minutes. But that's, again, don't want to worry about it, don't want to think about it. You're saving for retirement. Try to get into a target retirement date fund. They'll all be a little bit different if they're from different fund families, but the idea is basically the same. It adjusts and gets more towards safer securities like bonds and cash as you get closer to retirement, and you don't have to mess with it. Now, mutual funds in general, I've touched on these already, but if you, how do you get returns from these? The funds, remember, have to pass through anything happening with the securities they own to you. They make periodic distributions of dividend income. So you buy the S&P 500 index fund, for example, fund that tracks that, and some of those stocks, or many of those stocks, will be paying dividends. The fund will pass your share of those dividends through to you periodically. The fund itself will be buying and selling shares of those 500 companies. They'll have capital gains. Some of those will sell it at a gain, some will sell it at a loss. They pass through your share of those capital gains to you. You get a capital gains distribution. You have to pay taxes on both these things each year. Now, also, some of the securities held by the portfolio won't be sold. And the values of those will go up. That's an unrealized capital gain. No taxes on that till you sell your mutual fund. You might sell your fund for a gain or a loss. Now, total return for the fund is based on net asset value, and we mentioned that term before. Net asset value is just the fund adds up the values of all the securities it's holding, subtracts any liabilities the fund might have, divides by the number of shares outstanding. That's the net asset value of the fund. And when you buy, you get the net asset value. When you sell, you get the net asset value. Remember, you're going to buy directly from the fund and sell your shares back to the fund, and they're going to make both those prices based on the current net asset values. Your total return on a fund will be, hey, what was your net asset value at the beginning? What capital gains distributions did you get? What dividend distributions did you get? Your change in net asset value, that's going to be your numerator. So this will show you your gain amount up the top line here. Divide that by what was your initial investment, and that's going to be your total return. So you can't just look at your change in net asset value, because you've got those even if you're not buying or selling, you're going to get a dividend and capital gains distribution most likely. Now, fees. This sounds like a dud topic. Why are we going to talk about mutual fund fees? Well, because who is paying these fees if you own a fund? You may not even see the fees directly, but they're all coming out of your earnings there, and some of them even before then. So some funds will have a load fee, some will have a 12B1 fee. We'll see that I'm not going to like any of these fees, either of those fees. All funds are going to have a management fee, and some funds will have a back-end load. Again, I don't like that one either. But so there's fees that come with mutual funds. So, yeah, again, why do you care about them? Oops. Because these come out of your pocket directly. So here's an example. Again, I keep mentioning Vanguard funds. I like them because of their low fees. The total stock market index fund, if you get the premier version of this, you may have to have a little more money invested, has a total expense ratio of 0.05%. And this fund has like 2,000 different stocks in it. And it has the S&P 500 stocks for the most part, and it's going to have some smaller companies and some mid-cap funds in there. So small, large, and mid-cap stocks in there. But anyway, expense ratio 0.05%. That's not 5%. That's not 0.5%. That's 0.05%. So a real small cut they take for overseeing this fund. A typical fund similar to this might charge over 1%. And so Vanguard shows fees on $10,000 invested over 10 years. If you had this 1.08% charge, that would mean $2,400 in fees just on $10,000 over 10 years. That adds up. With the Vanguard fund, your total fees over that period would be $118. Big difference there. Big difference. Okay. So this assumes your money growing and whatever. But anyway, so you save a lot of money. These fees, the returns of the mutual funds are kind of unknown. The fees are kind of guaranteed. So the fund's going to take this fee, whether the market's up or your fund's up, down, or whatever. They're going to take those fees right off the top. So suppose you had $10,000 and you invested it for 40 years at 9%. So remember, we've done time value money. You could figure out what that grew to. Let's say you had no fees. You made 9%, or maybe that's your Vanguard fund after the 0.05%. You still end up with 9%. Take another 1% per year off for a management fee, so you end up earning just 8% instead per year. What would your difference be? Well, that at 9%, your money would $10,000 would go to $314,000. With that 1% extra management fee coming out per year, your money would only grow with compounding to $217,000. So 1%, you weren't impressed before, but this is costing you over 40 years just with $10,000, almost $100,000 lost just due to fees. That's why I prefer, backing up, low fees. You got something like this taken out, it's coming off the top. You may not see it, but it's going to add up over time. Now, some funds have what's known as a load. What is a mutual fund load? This is an upfront commission, and this is just money right off the top. These loads can be as high as 8.5%. The scary thing about the load is, I've got this coming up in the next slide or a later slide, this comes right up front. So I'll be repeating this, I think, in a minute. So if you had an 8% load on a $1,000 mutual fund investment, you would end up with $920 invested. So you got $1,000, you got $920 in the market, and you've got to get a pretty good return just to get back to even. So it might take you a year to get back to where you started. Some funds call themselves low load funds, and they charge not more than 3% to call themselves a low load fund. So does paying a better return get you or paying a load get you a better return? That will be the sales pitch you get from the person trying to get you into this fund. This fund is a great one. It's worth getting into. That's why you have to pay to get into it. Well, there's no guarantee that, and studies have shown that funds that charge loads don't have any better performance than funds that don't on average. So, there may be some great fund, but you can't guarantee those returns going forward. The load actually, for the most part, goes to not improving the performance of the fund in any way, not to the management of the fund. The load goes to the finance salesperson who sold you the fund. So it's basically a sales commission is where most of that load goes to. So it's not going to improving the fund or its performance, and certainly doesn't guarantee improved performance. It's a sales payment for the most part to the person who sold you the fund. And as I said, if you invest $1,000 in a fund with an 8% load, you'll show, hey, here's your account balance, $920. And if my fund dropped from $1,000 to $920, I'd be depressed. And doing this voluntarily up front is something I won't ever do. So I'm not a fan of load funds. Now, you go to a financial planner and they may end up suggesting a load fund. Why is this? Well, they have to make money. This is one way they make money. They do have they're not, if this is the only way they make money is through fees from mutual funds, they're not going to put you into what is known as a no load fund because, well, heck, they don't make any money off that. So what you could do, instead of going to just a financial advisor who's not going to charge you anything, they're going to end up charging you, is if you really want to talk to a financial planner, go to a fee-only planner who charges you by the hour. And then those people should not be putting you into any load funds. If they do, they need to be reported. But they'll put you into no load funds because they're charging for their time and not getting an extra kickback or payment through the mutual funds. So one thing to be aware of if you're talking with anybody, do they have a conflict of interest? So what often happens is, hey, they're going to steer you to the fund that gives them the most money if that's how they're paid. Because again, people react to incentives. Another category of fund fees is something called a 12B1 fee. This is an annual marketing and distribution fee. Basically, this is, hey, the finance person who sold you the fund gets paid every year you stay in the fund, and that could be as high as 1%. It's often referred to as a hidden load. I would prefer you go with a no load fund and not pay this either, but this is the type of fund you'll get if you go through some financial planners who aren't fee only. There are some funds that charge a back-end load. So if you take your money out early, they're going to charge you a percentage of what you're taking out. These back-end loads generally decline over time. So if you took your money out in the first year, you'd pay the full, say 7%. If you waited a year, more than a year, maybe you just pay 6%. You wait more than 2 years, you maybe pay 5%. So these decline over time. The salesperson will say, hey, the reason for this is we want to encourage long-term investment. If people take their money out early, our investment professionals have to sell securities when it might not be a good time, etc. Well, what I'd prefer is that they do a good job so I don't want to take my money out and not have to force me to keep my money in there through this coercive commission structure here, or this coercive charge. So I don't like these back-end loads either. Now, all funds are going to charge management fees. There's some that I've got could range from 0.05% to 2 or 3. There are some of my Vanguard funds that I think are even below this 0.05%. This is a fee for managing the fund. Index funds, where we're not trying to beat the market or beat a particular segment of the market, generally have lower management fees. And so a lot of the Vanguard funds are index funds. They're just trying to track the market instead of beating it, or track the market or a particular segment of the market. So what you see is some of the funds that charge high management fees to try to beat the market end up actually underperforming the indexes. So you end up being better by just trying to be average in many cases. So there are some actively managed funds that do quite well, but on average, a whole lot of them don't beat the index, because say you got a fund charging you a 2% management fee, they'd have to beat this Vanguard fund by 1.95%. Try to pick one of comparable risk. They'd have to beat it, say, by 1.95% just to break even. If they beat this fund there by 1.5% and then still took their 2% fee, which they would, you'd end up underperforming by about 0.5%. So everything else equal, you certainly want lower charges. The lower charges are the reason a lot of people go with index funds. Fund profile, you can find, hey, some basic information about your fund. So let me just pull over. Oops, that's not the one I want to pull over. Here's our Vanguard Target 2065. I keep repeating this one. 2065 is an example of, hey, I think this is stressing me out. I don't want to have to worry about picking something. You pick a target retirement date fund, let somebody else worry about it. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to have ups and downs. This fund is down right now. Anything for the most part, or most things stock-wise, are down right now. Had we bought into Amazon or Walmart or Dollar General, and just those particular stocks are up. Tesla's up big for some reason, which anyway, the coronavirus isn't going to help auto sales either. But anyway, some stocks are up, but most stock funds are down. This fund right now is, I'm sure, down for the year. It's up for the day. So I don't have the, the 1 year return is down 10%. So this is a relatively new fund, so it doesn't have a lot of history out there right now. But don't freak out over that 10%, because you've got plenty of time to bounce back up. Well, you got about 45 years. And if you buy into this now, you'll be buying in at lower costs, and hopefully it will definitely bounce back up over the next 45 years is my bet. But you can, again, find your overview of your funds, see more detail. This is different fund families will have their setup a little bit differently, but they have the same basic info. And there's our style box. This particular fund is a blend of large cap stocks, a blend of value and growth large cap stocks. See if I got the... they're not showing me a style box for... I don't see a style box for the 2065 fund, but we do see that it's a mix of stock and bonds. So I guess that's why it's not just a pure stock fund, that they're not showing that style box. A mix of stocks and bonds, but mostly stocks, almost 90% stocks. That's the Target 2065 fund again. You can also find fees. So the fees for funds aren't hidden. So are there any load fees or anything like that? Is there a redemption fee? I don't like that one. This Vanguard fund charges $250 or $10 a year if you've got less than 10,000 bucks in there. The management fee for the basic level is 0.17%. For more money invested, it goes down to 0.07%. Well, there's the total fees. This is what's kind of relevant. So about 0.19 for whichever one I cut and pasted this from. Let me pull over your target 2065 fund. It's got a 0.15% management fee. They say the average for similar funds is 0.45%. All you need to get into this fund is a minimum investment of $1,000. You got to look at these. Some of the Vanguard funds have higher minimums, but you can open one of these through an IRA or a regular account with just $1,000 to start with. So fee, no 12B1 fee, none of those load fees. I don't like those. All right, so what do I suggest regarding mutual fund fees? No load funds. So the Vanguard funds, you're not going to find load funds, no 12B1 fees, no back-end loads. If you're going to pick your own funds, which, what you probably want to do is just say no to these. Another thing you could do is, say you look at this target retirement date fund and it actually shows you what's in here. Where'd it go? Yeah, so here's the funds they have in there. Let's say you didn't want this much international exposure. You could buy your own mix of funds and create your own portfolio. And you could use this as a starting point and look at other companies and see what they have in their target 2065 equivalent funds. But, go with no load options there. Don't pay those load fees. Don't pay 12B1 fees. Don't get a fund with a back-end load. And here's numbers to see. None. That's what you want to see for most of those fees. So management and some other minor expenses are normal. And so the total fees there's purchase fee, redemption fee, 12B1 fee, none for the Vanguard fund. Our total expense ratio, 0.15% per year. All right, let's take a quick break here and we'll pause this and pick up with ETFs in the next part of this exciting series. And I'm serious, this stuff is exciting. This is where you want to have your funds, your investment funds, definitely starting out probably in mutual funds or their cousins' exchange traded funds.